My sister called to tell me our father was dead. The only problem was that he was sitting 3 feet away from me at the time, stealing bacon off my plate and sipping his coffee like it was any other Tuesday morning. I didn't say a word. I just quietly hit speaker. Rachel wasn't crying. Her voice was flat, almost bored, as she explained that Dad had passed away overnight, that everything he owned now belonged to her and her husband Kyle, and that I was getting nothing. Kyle laughed somewhere in the background and said I was finally out of the family for good. My father set his coffee down, very slowly, and smiled at me, because the man they thought was dead had just heard every single word. What happened over the following 2 days ended in a funeral that people in our town still bring up to this day. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back 9 months, to the day Dad fell off a ladder cleaning his gutters and broke his wrist. I was working out of state as a travel nurse, so my sister Rachel offered to step in and take care of him while he healed. She convinced him to sign a limited power of attorney, so Kyle could handle his bills until his hand got better. It sounded harmless. I had no reason not to trust them. Looking back, that was the first mistake. Every time I called after that, Rachel picked up instead of Dad. He was sleeping. He was resting. He was too tired to talk. I mailed him a new phone after she told me his had broken. It disappeared. I sent another one. That one vanished too. By the time I flew home for Christmas, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. He barely spoke. And when I asked about his finances, he admitted he hadn't seen a single bank statement in months, because Kyle handled all of it now. The second I suggested we sit down and go through his accounts together, Kyle got defensive, accused me of stirring up drama, and Dad, exhausted, worn down, asked me to just let it go so we could enjoy the holiday. So I did. I went back to work. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't even close. A few months later, an old nursing friend called me with something that stopped me cold. She worked at a care facility where an elderly man kept asking every single nurse on staff if they knew his daughter Emma. That man was my father. Nobody had told me he'd been placed there. I got in my car and didn't stop driving until I reached that building. Dad looked thinner, but the second he saw me, I knew instantly his mind was completely intact. He'd simply been told that I knew about the nursing home, that I had approved it, that I didn't want to be involved. They had taken his phone, intercepted anything I tried to send, and spent months convincing each of us that the other one had stopped caring. The facility confirmed something that made my blood run cold. There was no diagnosis, no dementia, no cognitive decline. He had been legally competent this entire time. Within the hour, he signed his own discharge papers and walked out the front door beside me. The next day, we went straight to his bank. What we found there was worse than anything I had imagined. Nearly $187,000 gone. Large transfers funneled into Kyle's company. Other payments quietly covering a condo Rachel and Kyle owned in Florida. And buried underneath it all, paperwork for a massive loan taken out against Dad's house. A house that had been fully paid off for years. An elder law attorney froze the loan within days, revoked every power of attorney on file, and then found something even worse. A second power of attorney, forged, giving Kyle complete control over everything Dad owned. Medical records proved my father had been under sedation at a doctor's appointment on the exact date that document claimed he'd signed it in front of a notary. Our attorney gave us one crucial piece of advice. The case against Rachel and Kyle would be far stronger if they were actually relying on those forged documents, out loud, in front of witnesses. That's when Dad came up with a plan none of us saw coming. His oldest friend Earl, a retired funeral director, called Rachel and calmly told her that Dad had passed away in his sleep. No death certificate, no official paperwork. Just quiet, believable news from a man everyone in town trusted without question. Rachel didn't ask how he died. She didn't ask to see him. Her very first question was about the paperwork. Within hours, she and Kyle were changing the locks on his house. 2 days later, half the town packed into a hall for my father's memorial service. Veterans, neighbors, decades of church friends. Kyle walked up to the podium like he belonged there and announced in front of everyone that Dad had left the house, the money, the truck, everything to him and Rachel. Then, almost proudly, he read the line stating that I had been intentionally left with nothing. The room went silent because everyone in that hall knew exactly how close my father and I had always been. And that's when the side door opened. My father walked into his own memorial service in his best suit. Rachel looked like she'd seen a ghost. Kyle stood frozen at the podium, the forged will still raised in his hand. Dad walked straight past him, adjusted the microphone himself, looked out at the room, and said 4 words. "Dead men don't sign papers." Our attorney stepped forward immediately and laid it all out. The medical records proving Dad couldn't have signed anything that day. The bank statements tracing every stolen dollar, the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent loan, and the will Kyle was still holding in his hand. Even one of Kyle's own coworkers admitted, right there, that he'd unknowingly witnessed paperwork he'd been told was routine. Within minutes, deputies walked into the hall and led Kyle out as his entire story collapsed in front of every person he had spent years trying to impress. Rachel finally cracked. She admitted they'd been drowning in debt and thought they could quietly replace the money before anyone noticed. Then she turned around and tried to blame me for exposing them. That was the moment I understood she wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was only sorry she got caught. Outside, as the deputies were about to drive away, Dad looked at her one last time and finally said the words he'd been saving for 2 days. "You buried the wrong man, sweetheart." Most of the money was eventually recovered. The loan against the house was canceled. Kyle lost his mortgage license and is facing fraud charges. Rachel took a plea deal: probation, restitution, community service. Dad moved back into his own home, and the first thing he did was wind my late mother's old brass clock. The second it started ticking again,